Alright, so Quixel Mixer 2020 just launched, and it brought several major changes. The first of which, it is now completely free for everyone, forever. So that's kind of a big deal. It used to be locked behind a $20 a month subscription, unless you, well, very recently, since they got acquired by Epic, the company behind Unreal, they made it free if you use Unreal Game Engine. But although their giant Megascan library is still locked behind a subscription paywall unless you are using it for a Unreal Engine project, Mixer itself, as well as Bridge, have gone free for everyone, which pretty good move on Epic's part. Epic's really been spending a lot of money trying to, I would say, gain public support, as well as bolster the kind of hobbyist, indie, like the kind of grassroots developers. They're targeting smaller developers with free monthly assets. They're giving a lot of money away to open source projects, and they bought Quixel Mixer. Well, they didn't buy Quixel Mixer, they bought the company, and now they've made Quixel Mixer and Bridge free, and they've made the Megascans library free with Unreal. So Epic seems to really have small devs in mind as a target now. They're trying to shift from AAA only to AAA and indie. Pretty hard, it would seem, with a lot of learning material and free content. But anyway, enough about Epic and their ambitions. Quixel Mixer is out, and with this new release, it's not only free, it also has new 3D texturing for whatever mesh you want, really, as well as some painting functionality. And they really seem to be gearing up to take on Substance Painter, which again is really cool because Painter's been bought by Adobe, and Adobe is basically doing the opposite of Unreal. Unreal's slashing prices, making things free and more accessible for everybody, and Adobe's great ambition, I believe, is to lock everything in existence behind a $500 a month Adobe paywall at some point. But anyway, we're not quite there yet, but I do have faith that Adobe will one day achieve the great monthly paywall dream. And so that's a really scary proposition, because for smaller devs, for students, for people just starting out, they don't really want an expensive Adobe subscription. No one wants that, but at least big studios can afford it. A lot of people can't. And luckily, Substance Painter is still available through Steam for a one-time upfront cost. About $150, I believe. Which is pretty reasonable for what it can do. That's a good price. It's well worth it in my opinion. But that could go away at I want to say any time, but really I'd say any time after this year. I can't imagine they'd pull it. It is the 2020 version. They've already guaranteed support through 2020. I would imagine eventually they're going to pull it from Steam, though. 1 year it'll just disappear. And then it'll only be subscription. And then it'll likely, I wouldn't be surprised if Adobe got rid of the indie tier subscription and only had the more expensive professional license. And so before that happens, it is completely imperative that we get a usable alternative. Something that can completely replace Painter in every way. And right now, Mixer seems to be the best bet out there. I mean, it's good. They've got talented people working on it. Epic seems to be working really hard to gain the indie devs' loyalty and trust. But the real question for now is Quixel Mixer 2020 good enough to replace Painter now? I believe that's what, well, I was wondering, and a lot of people, I'm sure, are wondering and debating and thinking about. But unfortunately for now, the quick answer is no. No, it's really not good enough to replace Painter yet. And I'm not just trying to, be a killjoy here, ruin the epic moment Mixer is having, but it really is missing several key features as well as countless other nice to have features. Probably the biggest feature it's missing that you would immediately notice is it cannot bake mesh maps. It just doesn't have any functionality to do that. So you're going to have to use some kind of third-party tool to bake your mesh maps. In their own demo they did in a live stream, they used, I do believe it was Marmoset Toolbag, they said. And that, I believe it has a $180 indie license. I think that's perpetual. I'm not 100% sure. I don't use Marmoset Toolbag personally, but from what I've seen and heard, it's pretty good. I believe it mostly does scene compositing, rendering, as well as mesh map baking. And it does a pretty good job, honestly, baking mesh maps. It's quite comparable to Substance Painter, although I do kind of want to give the edge for simplicity and speed to Substance Painter. But again, I don't really use Marmoset. I've only toyed with it like once forever ago. I'm not an expert. I could be wrong. It could be better. It could be way worse. I'm not actually sure. All I know is Painter does a phenomenal job. It's really easy, with especially the key feature of Painter versus other really simple bakers is the ability to bake and sort by mesh name. That's really helpful for avoiding any kind of artifacts that you would normally get if you tried to bake something like this, where it would cast a ray through part of the mesh and then it would start bleeding over. Like a lot of times if you tried to like bake this in something like Blender or XNormal without doing something like making like a really good cage and maybe doing an exploded mesh bake where you separate every piece so they're far apart in the scene so you don't get any ray bleed. But that's really tedious. It's way easier, you just throw it in Substance, bake, you get all your maps. You get a lot more than just a normal map. You get your ID map, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, thickness, you get all the maps. And that's really, really helpful. This is a big part of speeding up the workflow, getting high quality results in a quick, efficient, repeatable manner. And Mixer doesn't even have basic baking functionality as of right now. Not to mention Painter. Painter has, I would say, industry-leading baking functionality. So they definitely have a ways to go. it's really not going to be a suitable replacement until it can do as good or preferably a better job. Like, if they could find a way to simplify beyond what Substance Painter has done here for mesh map baking, that would actually be pretty cool. I'd like that. But honestly, Painter's got it pretty seamless. I'm not really sure what Mixer could come up with to do it better, honestly. So that's a big thing, because as an indie dev, there's no real point if to keep your workflow the same, buying a similar cost program just to bake your maps, when you could buy Substance Painter, bake your maps, and then texture them all in one easy integrated package. So that's kind of a big blow for it right there. I mean, I'm overusing the word kind of, apparently. But, yeah, it's a big blow there. It really is. The second thing that's really separating it that I noticed, it has a very limited amount of materials and just textures, assets really, to help you texture your mesh. They have about, I don't know, maybe 100 here. Substance Painter 1 has way more, and these, the ones they do give you, a lot of them are pretty similar. I think probably the worst offender I noticed was these three right here. These are all plastic PVC. The only difference is the color. And that really seems like it should be something... Yeah, get on the stack. That should really be something that you are changing. Okay, it's trying to load it. It's also, it can be a bit slow. Not too slow. But really, this should be something you're adjusting more in here. If I want it to be blue, it is being quite laggy right now. To be fair, I am recording, but if I wanted blue PVC, that's how you would do it. That's what makes sense. You change the color. I don't get why they need different smart materials for pre-done colors. This just kind of feels like they're padding out the amount of free stuff that ships with it. I mean, they do have a massive library of Megascan materials, but unless you're doing a Unreal Engine project, you've got to pay for these. And that's a monthly subscription. You can't buy these outright. And so I'm not going to really count these because right now I'm focusing on it more of a indie dev angle here, since like a big studio, I don't think big studios really care about how much software costs. So the fact that Mixer's gone free, that doesn't really mean anything to them. Don't believe me, just ask Blender. Blender's been more than good enough to replace Max and Maya for a while now. It still hasn't. They still pay like $3,000 per license every year per copy of Max and Maya, because it's good enough and it's what everyone knows. And so Mixer's going to have quite a hard time breaking into AAA studios just because Painter's already in AAA studios. And if Max and Maya have proved anything, it's once you're in the door, you've got to be really disruptive. You've got to have a really killer feature set. That means if you don't use this tool, you will produce worse assets and way slower. And that's going to be a hard thing for Mixer to do. Painter already does what Painter does about as well as anything could, really. They haven't improved it too dramatically, I would say, over this last year. And that's not really due to, I would say, laziness. It's just product maturity. Painter's about as good as anyone could want. Probably the only thing I might add is maybe some kind of better triplanar projection. I mean, some meshes it just doesn't really work that well on, which is unfortunate. So maybe more options, a more robust version of triplanar projection, but other than that, Painter's pretty solid. So Mixer's gonna have a hard time in AAA, but for Indie, all it has to do is not be owned by Adobe and be somewhat comparable. And those are two things that are very easy to accomplish, and it's quite nearly there. It's already got not being owned by Adobe. That's a big one. But in terms of being comparable, it is comparable, but it's lacking in quite a bit. I mean, I could go over the materials a bit more. All these smart materials, most of them are variants of metal and plastics, which aren't the most amazing. Several of them are just colors, again. And I'm not very impressed with them padding out the few things they have with colored versions. Don't know if you noticed, but yeah, I'm not impressed with that. They have several different sands, which, okay, like that's fine, but if you only have 100 things, do I really want like 6 of them to be sand? I don't know if it's 6. 5? Yeah, that's actually clay. That's a bit different, but 6 of them, nope, I keep saying 6. 5 are sand. And I don't find myself adding sand that often. If I did, I feel like I could just kind of fake it with like high frequency noise and, you know, a sandish color gradient, but, you know, it's nice that they're there. It's just, is this one of the few things I need? They've got a few things that I feel are too hyper specific. Like this one rock cliff. Like, okay, that's nice. But that will literally only be used once for one kind of asset, and that is a rock cliff wall. That's all this is good for. They do include some rust. They've got metals. They have a painted wood up here, and then somewhere they have a plywood. I'd like to see more woods, honestly. That would be pretty great. Maybe some human skin, because the only skin they have is rotten animal. I don't find myself using rotten animal skin all that much. As well as animal skin, which again is something I don't find myself using nearly as often as human skin. So not having a human skin is kind of a big deal if you're a character artist. Substance Painter includes quite a few human skins. Out of the box, quite a few metals, fabrics, woods. They just have a much larger library here. I do like, actually, though, I think the imperfections. They seem to have a decent amount. They're pretty high quality. I mean, they could do more here. Substance Painter has a lot of really smart and clever generators, and a way more grunge maps, honestly. But these are pretty good, actually. Not as good as Painter, but pretty good. I feel good about those. They do give you some fabric, which is nice. You get like some moss and some mud. But I really would like to see this padded out quite a bit more. Like they have one paper and it's wrinkled paper. What if I don't want wrinkled paper? What if I want a more generic rock? These are all very defined types of rock. Maybe I need, more well-defined rocks would be nice, but also more generic, subtle, the kind of rubbish, unrealistic rocks everyone puts in games and everyone just pretends they look real. Now they've got plaster. That's kinda cool. I'd like to see some more. I'd like to see more wood. Having one plywood texture is not that cool. They've got scratched rubber. Like, there's not a lot here. We got several concretes. So they actually kind of have you for concrete. That's something. But there needs to be more here. I'd like to see... I even feel like Substance Painter, although it does have way more things in here. Like a lot more. Way, way more. I'm not sure how many things it ships with, but a much larger variety. I even feel like this is a little small, and I wish they'd stop adding all the new materials to their Substance Source library, which is, again, locked behind a monthly paywall. I feel like they should be adding a few more free forever, well, not free forever, but included in the base version of Substance Painter materials. I think they're just leaning a little too far towards, if you want a good selection of material, get our subscription. And as of right now, Quixel is even more unbalanced in that regard, where they have 11,000, and those aren't all materials. But if you go with their paid version, they have hundreds of materials of metals and woods, and they have all sorts of stuff. You got metal, and there's a Japanese wooden door. Maybe there's some metal on it. But, yeah, they have tons of stuff in the paid Quixel library, not a lot in the free included library. And that's rather unfortunate. But other than the lack of baking and the lack of a real usable material library, honestly, it doesn't need to do all that much that doesn't already do. They do have some decent masking, which is kind of essential if you're going to be properly texturing a material. You can't bake a ID mask in here. And you also, they don't have any kind of polygon or mesh fill tool like Substance Painter has. Yeah, if I click on this, it'll let me bring it up. But this is honestly a pretty great tool. I use the mesh fill a lot. I literally used it for this table here because I wanted to have a different material layer and offset for each plank. And so I made a mask really quickly for each individual piece of this table using the mesh fill. that's a really cool tool that is not in Mixer as of now. At least I'm quite sure it's not. Maybe it's hidden somewhere really weird, but I doubt it. I haven't seen anyone use it or talk about it, and I couldn't find it. The other thing, another decent feature they're missing is their projection. They have a box projection, which I believe is kind of similar to triplanar. Or I think it is. I think it's trying to be. I could be totally wrong. Maybe this has nothing to do with that. It's not at all like triplanar. It's all in my head. But it doesn't seem to be very good. It's definitely worse than triplanar projection. I mean, for one, like, this does not line up or match at all. This grain, I don't want it going across. And I'm not really... I mean, I know triplanar probably would do that as well, honestly. That's one of the reasons why sometimes you have to work around triplanar. It's not as easy as triplanar project, everything's good. It's more just triplanar project, and even though you have a seam, like right there, there's a seam, it does not look like there's a seam. You can see I even have like a faint scratch carrying over. This looks like a solid piece. You don't have an abrupt change as you go over the UV seam. Whereas with box projection, I definitely do get tons of abrupt, very noticeable, not correct. Some things do seem like they line up, like that seems good, but then this is kind of horrible. And that seems kind of okay. So I'm not quite sure what it's doing, honestly. Or why I have this big black line here. And everything like below it's awful. But yeah. Box projection, not really giving me seamless tiling of my texture. So it's really, I would say, not as good or comparable to Painter's triplanar projection yet. And that's kind of a big deal, because something else that they don't have is they don't have a clone tool, I believe. At least I haven't seen one. But using the clone tool is about the only other way I'm aware of where you could realistically try to hide your seams by cloning sections over each of them. And I would say that's not ideal, but sometimes, especially when triplanar doesn't work, you end up having to use the clone tool. Other times it can just be better or helpful. But I do mostly only use it to try to hide seams and make textures kind of look like they tile over. Because like with the clone tool, I could make this less awful looking. Like this does not look correct at all. And with the clone tool, I could just kind of paint over it and make it all... It wouldn't look right, but it would look less wrong. And so not having a clone tool, not having triplanar projection, these are big problems. They also just don't really have the kind of generators and filters that Painter has. Painter also has their particles. They have a really good brush system. And they even have their dynamic brushes with configurable randomness and variation. That's really cool. Mixer doesn't have that. They have a about as basic as a brush system as you could imagine. So, but definitely it has a long way to go. I couldn't see you realistically using this to get really high quality assets. At least, I mean, I'm sure certain assets. I mean, like the speeder or the spaceship. I believe it was supposed to be a spaceship. It kind of looked more like a speeder to me, but no, I think it was a spaceship they used in the demo. That came out pretty okay, but that's honestly because all that was metal and paint. And that you are going to be able to do pretty well in Mixer, because there aren't tricky things that crop up all the time, like trying to get wood grain flowing across the mesh correctly. That's a tricky thing to get perfect on a model. And that's the kind of thing Mixer's going to struggle with. Mixer's going to struggle, especially without having human skin. Characters. But don't believe they have... I think they had a few fabrics, but not a lot. But yeah, it's really easy to texture like metal and sci-fi type things, because all you do is make it metal. And I mean, you could do that in Blender even. Blender's plenty good enough to texture like a simple metal model. But if you're trying to get a really high quality job, Mixer's just missing too many options. It doesn't have the features to get really top quality results. Doesn't have what you need to get really good variation easily and quickly. It doesn't have the material variety. You can't bake your maps. It's missing a lot, honestly. It'll be a little bit until it's good enough to replace Painter, at least for me. For certain people and certain workflows, you know, maybe it's good enough now. I'm not going to say definitively no one can use Mixer. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Just for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people who are quite serious about the art they're doing, it's really just not good enough yet. I'm sure it will be, given time. I know they do have some pretty aggressive plans, and they plan to address a lot of these problems. And I will definitely be looking forward to that. I mean, as I said earlier, I really want an alternative to Painter. It doesn't have to be free. More than anything, I want an alternative to Painter. I do not trust Adobe at all, and I would love a real quality alternative. And at this point, although Mixer's not there yet, I am convinced, given the ambition, the quality they have so far, and the feature set they have so far, I am convinced they will get there. And I imagine they'll get there, assuming they do keep pace and they meet their milestones and all that. I'd like to think they could basically get there within 1 to 2 years if they really work at it. Because although it is missing a lot, at the same time, it isn't. All they have to do is add mesh baking, improve their 3D projection, because the box projection is not good enough right now. So we need something else. We need a few more tools, a few more included materials, and there you go. It's ready. It doesn't need to do literally everything Painter can do. If it could do just 80% of what Painter can do, if it can do the main things that I use Painter for, that's good enough. I mean, there are so many things in Painter I don't use, don't touch, and literally don't even really appreciate or understand why they're there or what you'd use it for. And some things I honestly feel like are just kind of thrown in and abandoned. Some of the things are just so bad. And like I believe they have 2 dirts, one of which is terrible and the other is pretty okay. That's just Painter, but yeah. Painter's not perfect, but it's the closest thing to perfect we have. And Mixer definitely is gonna be a bit bleh. I can no longer speak. But yeah, it'll be a bit before Mixer catches up. But I am definitely looking forward to that day.